December 5, 1972. A black helicopter lifts off from a secret base in Laos. No lights, no sound except a whisper cutting through darkness. Inside, 2 Air America pilots and 2 Lao commandos prepare for what should be impossible. They're about to fly deep into North Vietnam, past radar stations and anti-aircraft batteries, to tap a phone line used by enemy commanders. This isn't science fiction. According to declassified CIA documents from studies in intelligence, the agency had spent 4 years developing what they called the Hughes 500P. Engineers dubbed it the Quiet One, and for good reason. At 4,000 feet altitude, this helicopter produced less noise than someone whispering. At ground level, it was nearly silent. The modifications were extraordinary. A 5-bladed main rotor instead of 4, a scissor-style 4-bladed tail rotor, specialized engine mufflers, and a coat of black radar-absorbent paint. The mission was born from desperation. By 1971, American forces were withdrawing from Vietnam. Peace talks dragged on in Paris. The CIA needed intelligence on what North Vietnamese leaders were actually planning. Traditional spy networks had failed. Hanoi's security apparatus was too effective. Someone proposed an audacious alternative: physically tap a military phone line 150 miles inside enemy territory. But how do you infiltrate one of the most heavily defended countries on Earth? North Vietnam had constructed an elaborate air defense network designed to destroy American bombers. Surface-to-air missiles dotted the landscape. MiG fighters patrolled from Vinh airfield. Any conventional helicopter would be heard miles away, shot down before crossing the border. The solution required technology that didn't yet exist. The CIA would have to build the world's quietest helicopter. This is the story of how American engineers achieved the impossible, creating a stealth aircraft decades before the public knew such technology existed. It's a tale of innovation under pressure, dangerous flying, and a single night mission that influenced helicopter design for generations to come. Helicopters are, by their very nature, loud machines. The distinctive thump-thump sound carries for miles, announcing their presence long before they arrive. For military operations, this creates an obvious problem. You can't sneak up on anyone when the enemy hears you coming. The loudest part of a helicopter isn't the engine, as many assume. It's the rotor blades themselves. Each spinning blade creates tiny tornadoes of air at its tip. When the next blade comes around, it strikes these vortices, producing a sharp, slapping sound. Engineers call this blade vortex interaction. On a standard military helicopter, this noise can be heard 2 miles away or more. The tail rotor contributes its own high-pitched whine. Spinning rapidly to counteract the torque from the main rotor, it generates a distinctly different sound signature. Together, these components create an acoustic fingerprint that identifies not just that a helicopter is approaching, but often what type it is. For the Central Intelligence Agency's Special Operations Division Air Branch, this presented a critical limitation. Throughout the 1960s, the CIA had wanted to use helicopters to quietly insert and extract agents in denied territory. But physics seemed to make this impossible. Even at night, even flying low, helicopters announced themselves. Local populations would hear them. Military forces would be alerted. The element of surprise was lost. Then in 1968, something changed. Hughes Tool Company, the aircraft manufacturer, faced pressure from a different source entirely. Police departments using Hughes helicopters in American cities were receiving noise complaints. Citizens didn't appreciate the racket. Hughes faced losing contracts if they couldn't make their helicopters quieter. Engineers at Hughes began experimenting with the tail rotor. They realized that by doubling the number of blades from 2 to 4, they could cut the rotor's speed in half. Slower rotation meant less noise. The modification worked remarkably well. When the Advanced Research Projects Agency, known as ARPA, heard about this development, they immediately saw military applications. ARPA, the Pentagon's Advanced Research Division, offered Hughes $200,000 in 1968 to apply similar noise reduction techniques to a military helicopter. The goal was ambitious: reduce helicopter noise to 1/10 of normal levels. Make it quiet enough that enemy forces might not hear it approaching until too late. Hughes chose the OH-6A Cayuse as their starting point. Known to Vietnam veterans as the Loach, this compact observation helicopter was already one of the quieter models in military service. But quiet wasn't the same as silent. The standard OH-6A could still be heard from considerable distance. Over the next year, Hughes engineers systematically attacked every source of noise. They designed a completely new 5-bladed main rotor to replace the standard 4-bladed version. More blades meant each individual blade moved more slowly, reducing the violent blade vortex interaction. They reshaped the blade tips, carefully sculpting the airflow to minimize turbulence. The tail rotor received even more dramatic attention. Hughes developed what they called a scissor-style 4-bladed rotor. This design not only reduced noise, but improved efficiency. Years later, this same tail rotor design would appear on the Hughes AH-64 Apache attack helicopter, testament to its effectiveness. But the rotors were only part of the solution. The engine itself generated significant noise through its exhaust and moving parts. Hughes engineers contacted a specialist at Lockheed who had been working on quieting problems for the Rolls-Royce RB211 engine used in commercial airliners. Together, they designed an advanced muffler system specifically for the helicopter's turboshaft engine. They also modified internal engine components, ensuring parts wouldn't rattle or vibrate against each other. By 1970, when ARPA tested the modified helicopter, the results exceeded expectations. According to declassified documents, the overall sound pressure level had been reduced by 17 to 20 decibels in hover and 14 to 16 decibels during flyover compared to the standard OH-6A. At an altitude of 4,000 feet, the helicopter produced approximately 40 decibels of noise. For reference, that's about as loud as a vacuum cleaner at close range, or a whisper at altitude. ARPA designated the project the Quiet Helicopter Program and expanded it. They brought in Sikorsky and Kaman, asking each company to apply similar techniques to their own helicopter models. But the Hughes design, now designated the Model 500P, where P stood for penetrator, remained the most promising. It combined substantial noise reduction with compact size and reasonable payload capacity. The Central Intelligence Agency took notice. By 1971, they faced a critical intelligence gap in Vietnam. The agency needed a way to eavesdrop on North Vietnamese leadership, and they had just found the tool that might make it possible. In 1968, the United States and North Vietnam began peace negotiations in Paris. American diplomats desperately needed to know what the Vietnamese side was planning. What were their bottom lines? What might they concede? What demands were negotiable? The CIA's traditional methods had failed. Hanoi's internal security was formidable. Agents couldn't penetrate the upper levels of government. Electronic eavesdropping from aircraft or ground stations couldn't intercept encrypted communications. The agency needed something more direct. According to declassified CIA documents, someone proposed a radical solution: physically tap a telephone line inside North Vietnam. Not near the border where infiltration might be possible, but deep in enemy territory. Specifically, near the city of Vinh, more than 150 miles south of Hanoi. Aerial reconnaissance had identified the target. A complex of military phone lines had been installed over a remote hilltop, 24 kilometers southwest of Vinh. The location was precipitous and isolated. Communist patrols circled the base of the hill, but rarely climbed to the summit. The phone lines connected North Vietnamese commanders in the field with leadership in Hanoi. If the CIA could tap those lines, they'd have direct access to strategic communications. But the challenges were enormous. Vinh sat deep inside North Vietnam. The area bristled with anti-aircraft weapons. MiG-21 fighters operated from Vinh Airfield. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, the main supply route from north to south, passed through the region and was heavily defended. Any infiltration attempt would have to cross some of the most fortified territory in Southeast Asia. The CIA examined every option. Parachute insertion was considered and rejected. The landing zone was too small, too exposed. Ground infiltration from Laos would take weeks and require crossing active combat zones. Submarine insertion wasn't possible this far inland. As the CIA article later stated, it became apparent that it would take something like a helicopter to accomplish this mission. But what helicopter could survive such a journey? The aircraft would need to fly at night to avoid visual detection. It would have to navigate at extremely low altitude, below radar coverage. Most critically, it had to be quiet enough that North Vietnamese troops wouldn't hear it approaching. No such helicopter existed. Then ARPA's quiet helicopter program produced results. The Hughes 500P demonstrated it could fly with dramatically reduced noise. The CIA saw their answer. In 1970, with White House approval, the agency purchased 4 Hughes helicopters through their Air America Front Company. 2 were standard Model 500s, useful for routine operations and as cover for the real purpose. The other 2 were modified 500PS, the quiet ones. The modifications went far beyond just noise reduction. For the deep penetration mission, the helicopters needed capabilities no standard aircraft possessed. Hughes engineers installed a more powerful Allison T-63, a 720 engine. The 1,100-pound aircraft could now lift more than 2,000 pounds, though for safety reasons the CIA kept total weight under 2,400 pounds. Range was critical. The mission profile called for flying nearly 50 kilometers into North Vietnam and back. Standard fuel tanks wouldn't suffice. Engineers designed special fuel bladders that fit through the main cabin like saddlebags, dramatically extending range without adding external tanks that would increase radar signature. Navigation presented another challenge. Flying at night, mere feet above the ground, through mountain passes and over unfamiliar terrain, required extraordinary precision. The CIA equipped each helicopter with a Singer-Kierfat inertial navigation system. This computer used gyroscopes to constantly calculate position, direction, and speed. Standard inertial systems had error rates of about 1 nautical mile per hour. Singer-Kierfat assembled units using specially selected components, reducing error to less than 1/4 nautical mile per hour. For visual navigation in total darkness, the helicopters carried forward-looking infrared cameras. This technology, still experimental in the early 1970s, used heat signatures to create television-like images in complete darkness. The pilot would fly by watching a small screen, navigating by thermal landmarks. The co-pilot wore early night vision goggles to watch for obstacles the FLIR might miss. The final touch was appearance. Engineers coated both helicopters in black radar-absorbent paint. This material, developed for reconnaissance aircraft, helped reduce radar returns. Combined with the small size and low-altitude flight profile, the 500Ps would be nearly invisible to North Vietnamese radar. According to Hughes documentation, the company completed both quiet ones by April 1971. Their first public flight demonstration occurred on April 8th. The aircraft performed flawlessly. By October, both helicopters were shipped to Taiwan, where the mission would take its next unexpected turn. The CIA's original plan called for Taiwanese pilots to fly the mission. If captured, an Asian crew might provide some measure of deniability for American involvement, however thin that fiction might be. The Republic of China's Air Force had a special unit, the 34th Squadron, that conducted covert operations for the CIA. But the Taiwanese pilots struggled with the demanding aircraft. The 500P, loaded with classified equipment and fuel, handled differently than any helicopter they'd flown. The night flying techniques required were extraordinarily difficult. Pilots had to navigate by instruments and infrared cameras while flying at treetop level through mountain terrain. One wrong move could mean crashing into a hillside at high speed. Disaster struck during training. One Taiwanese pilot crashed a 500P during a night landing. The helicopter was destroyed. Suddenly, the CIA had only one aircraft capable of performing the mission. Training difficulties continued. Internal disputes within the Taiwanese crew created additional problems. The agency made a decision. American pilots would fly the mission after all. Two Air America veterans, Lloyd George Anthony Lamoth Jr. and Daniel H. Smith, had been training the Taiwanese crews. Both men had extensive experience flying low-level missions in Vietnam. They knew the risks. They understood the aircraft. In spring 1972, they became the primary crew for what would be the most dangerous mission either had flown. In June 1972, the remaining quiet one arrived at PS-44, a remote CIA base near Pak Se in southern Laos. The two regular Hughes 500s had arrived months earlier, conducting routine missions to establish their presence. North Vietnamese intelligence networks in Laos would report seeing Hughes helicopters. Later, when the Black 500P flew its mission, its presence in the region wouldn't seem unusual. Pilots Lamoth and Smith faced a training regimen unlike anything in conventional military aviation. They couldn't practice the mission in North Vietnam itself, obviously, but they had to be prepared for every detail, every contingency. The mission allowed no margin for error. The CIA constructed a detailed mock-up of the target site at PS-44. A tree was stripped of limbs and fitted with a crossbar to simulate the telephone pole. The mock-up's position matched the actual site's location and terrain. Overhead, reconnaissance photography provided exact details of the surrounding area. The pilots practiced the approach hundreds of times. They memorized the route from Laos to the target, mountain passes, river valleys, landmarks visible on infrared cameras. They flew practice runs at night, navigating by instruments alone, learning to trust the FLIR system and inertial navigation. They practiced flying nap of the earth, following terrain contours at altitudes sometimes measured in feet rather than hundreds of feet. They even practiced flying between the banks of stream beds, using natural features as cover. 2 Lao commandos were selected to actually place the wiretap. They practiced exiting the helicopter quickly and efficiently. They learned to climb the mock telephone pole using special equipment. They rehearsed stapling the tap into place, a delicate operation that had to be completed in minutes. Speed was essential. The longer the helicopter remained stationary, the greater the risk of detection. The wiretap itself was a sophisticated device. It would intercept signals from the phone line and transmit them to a solar-powered relay station. The relay would then send the intelligence back to CIA receivers in Laos. The pilots practiced deploying these relays, flying to pre-selected hilltops and dropping camouflaged mesh webs over tree crowns. Weather became a critical factor. The mission required specific conditions. A partial moon provided enough ambient light for the night vision goggles without making the helicopter too visible. A slight overcast was desirable, diffusing what moonlight existed. Dense fog or heavy clouds would make navigation impossible. Clear skies might allow visual detection. The first attempt came on October 5, 1972. Everything seemed ready. Weather conditions were acceptable. The crew prepared for takeoff. Then the forward-looking infrared system failed. Without the FLIR, navigating at night would be too dangerous. The mission scrubbed. The FLIR failed again on 2 subsequent attempts. These were sophisticated, temperamental systems. The liquid nitrogen cooling required for the infrared sensors was difficult to maintain. Each failure meant waiting weeks or months for another optimal weather window. Late November brought another attempt. This time the helicopter actually crossed into North Vietnam. The FLIR worked. Navigation was proceeding as planned. Then dense ground fog rolled in, reducing visibility to near zero. Flying a few feet above the ground in such conditions was suicidal. The pilots reluctantly turned back. Meanwhile, larger events were unfolding. The Paris peace talks had reached a critical stage. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger was negotiating directly with North Vietnamese representatives. American intelligence needed every advantage. The pressure to complete the wiretap mission intensified. By December, the pilots and commandos had spent months training. They knew the route by heart. They understood the helicopter's capabilities and limitations intimately. They'd practiced the mission profile so many times they could execute it in their sleep. All they needed was the right weather and functioning equipment. December 5th presented another window. Moon phase was correct. Weather forecasts showed acceptable conditions. The FLIR system tested successfully. This was it. After 4 years of development, after countless training missions, after multiple failed attempts, the mission was finally going forward. At PS-44, ground crews made final preparations. The 500P was loaded with fuel, filling the standard tanks and the special saddlebag bladders. The wiretap equipment was secured. Solar-powered relays were loaded. Pilots Lamothe and Smith reviewed the route one final time. The 2 Lao commandos checked their climbing equipment. As darkness fell, the quiet one lifted off. No lights, instruments only. The pilots turned east toward North Vietnam. The helicopter accelerated, staying low, hugging terrain. Within minutes, they crossed the border. Behind them, Laos disappeared. Ahead lay 150 miles of enemy territory, defended by thousands of troops, radar stations, anti-aircraft batteries, and MiG fighters. The mission profile called for flying at 200 feet altitude, sometimes lower. The inertial navigation system guided them through mountain passes. The FLIR showed terrain features as ghostly thermal images on a small screen. Outside, the night was pitch black. They flew over known North Vietnamese anti-aircraft positions. The guns remained silent. No one heard them. No radar picked them up. The quiet one lived up to its name. Farmers tending fields after dark paid no attention as the whisper-quiet helicopter passed overhead. To anyone on the ground, it might have sounded like wind, nothing more. 48 kilometers into North Vietnam, the helicopter approached the target area. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Then the first problem arose. The pilots brought the 500P down into a dry stream bed, the pre-planned hiding position, while the commandos worked. The helicopter settled onto the rocky surface. According to the mission plan, they would wait here for 20 minutes while the Laotians placed the wiretap. As the skids touched down, disaster struck. A sharp rock punctured the liquid nitrogen tank that cooled the forward-looking infrared system. Nitrogen vented with a hiss. Within seconds, the FLIR went offline. The pilot's primary navigation tool for the return journey was gone. Simultaneously, the radar warning receiver began sounding its alarm. Enemy radar had detected them, or was sweeping nearby. The pilot silenced the warning. If MiG fighters were scrambling from Vinh airfield, there was nothing they could do about it now. The mission had to continue. The two Lao commandos exited the helicopter and scrambled into a nearby bomb crater. This crater came from an earlier American air raid, one specifically approved by the White House to hit near, but not on, the wiretap site. The strike had been deliberately placed to create cover positions for exactly this purpose. The commandos waited, listening, ensuring no North Vietnamese patrols were nearby. Satisfied they were alone, the Laotians moved toward their objective. The target telephone pole stood on the hilltop, clearly visible in the dim moonlight. They approached with their climbing equipment ready. Then they discovered the second problem of the night. The pole wasn't wood, as intelligence had indicated. It was concrete. Their climbing spikes, designed to bite into wooden poles, were useless. For a moment, the mission hung in balance. Months of preparation, millions of dollars in development, 4 years of engineering work, all potentially wasted because someone in aerial reconnaissance had identified the pole material incorrectly. But the Laotian commandos didn't quit. They simply changed tactics. Using only their hands and feet, they shimmied up the concrete pole. It was slower, more difficult, more exposed, but they climbed steadily. At the top, they located the phone lines. With practiced efficiency, they attached the wiretap device. The tap would intercept signals from the line, convert them to a format suitable for radio transmission, and send them to the relay station. The entire operation took perhaps 10 minutes, though to the pilots waiting in the stream bed, it must have felt much longer. Task completed, the commandos descended and returned to the helicopter. The pilots lifted off, climbing just high enough to clear obstacles. They flew to a pre-selected hilltop 340 meters high. There, they deployed the solar-powered communications relay. The relay system consisted of a mesh web that would drape over a tree crown, effectively invisible from the ground, but capable of receiving signals from the wiretap and retransmitting them back to Laos. With the relay in place, the mission was technically complete. Now came the dangerous part, getting home. The pilots had memorized the return route, but without the FLIR, navigation would be more difficult. The inertial system still functioned, providing position and heading. The co-pilot's night vision goggles still worked. But flying at 200 feet or less through mountain terrain in total darkness, without the thermal imaging they'd relied on for navigation, required extraordinary skill. The pilots retraced their route. The 500P climbed through mountain passes, descended into valleys, followed the same path that had brought them safely in. The engine ran smoothly, its muffled exhaust barely audible even from inside the cockpit. The 5-bladed rotor cut through the air with its distinctive quiet whisper. As they progressed westward, leaving Vinh behind, tension gradually eased. No MiGs had appeared. No anti-aircraft fire had erupted. They'd been detected by radar, perhaps, but no response had materialized. The Quiet One had infiltrated North Vietnam, conducted its mission, and was successfully exfiltrating. The helicopter crossed back into Laos. PS-44 appeared ahead. Lamothe and Smith brought the 500P in for landing at the secret base. Ground crews rushed forward as the rotor spun down. The mission had succeeded. According to participants, the wiretap was functioning. Intelligence was already flowing back to CIA analysts. The celebration at PS-44 that night was reportedly enthusiastic. Perhaps too enthusiastic. During the subsequent rest and relaxation in town, someone at the Wolverine nightclub bit off part of pilot Daniel Smith's ear. If a reprimand was ever entered in Smith's classified personnel file, it didn't matter. The CIA had no plans to send the Quiet One on another mission. Within a week, all American personnel connected with the operation were evacuated from Laos. The black helicopter was loaded onto a C-130 transport and flown out of the country. The CIA left the 2 regular Hughes 5s behind, maintaining the cover story that Air America had been operating standard helicopters all along. The Vinh wiretap went live on December 7, 1972. The timing was extraordinary. Operation Linebacker 2, the heavy bombing campaign against North Vietnam, began that same day. For the next several months, American analysts listened to North Vietnamese military communications, gleaning insights into strategy, tactics, and intentions. What specific intelligence Henry Kissinger received remains classified, but Kissinger himself later deemed it excellent intelligence, though he reportedly never questioned where it came from. The wiretap continued functioning through the final Paris peace talk negotiations, providing American diplomats with potential advantages in those critical discussions. In early May 1973, the Vinh wiretap went silent. The CIA suspected damage to the relay system. Perhaps weather had knocked down the mesh web. Perhaps North Vietnamese forces had discovered and removed it. 7 attempts were made between May 8th and June 16th to replace the relay. None succeeded, though these later missions used different, louder helicopters. The window for employing the Quiet One had closed. The Paris Peace Accords were signed in January 1973. American forces withdrew from Vietnam. The CIA's covert operations in Southeast Asia wound down. The age of the Quiet One was over. Upon its return to the United States, the surviving Hughes 500P was stripped of most of its classified features. The advanced navigation systems were removed. The specialized communications equipment was taken out. The CIA turned the aircraft over to the U.S. Army. What became of it afterward remains unclear. Some sources suggest it was used for further testing. Others indicate it may have been retired to storage. The second Quiet One, destroyed by the Taiwanese pilot during training, was never replaced. Despite the mission's success, despite the helicopter's proven capabilities, the CIA built no more. This puzzles historians and aviation experts even today. The agency had demonstrated that truly stealthy helicopter operations were possible. Why not maintain a small fleet of these aircraft for future missions? Several factors likely contributed to the decision. The 500P, for all its impressive stealth characteristics, had limitations. It was a light helicopter, and the specialized equipment reduced its payload capacity further. It struggled at high altitudes. As one Air America pilot later noted, in the long run, the 500P was not the best for setting wiretaps. It was not good for high-altitude work. For subsequent wiretap operations in North Vietnam, Air America used louder but more powerful helicopters. At least one more tap was successfully placed on the night of March 12th through 13th, 1973. The mission didn't require stealth. By that point, the peace process was nearly complete, and the political calculus had changed. Cost may have been another factor. The development and modification of the two 500Ps had been expensive. For a single specialized mission, the investment had been worthwhile. But maintaining a fleet of such specialized aircraft, with their temperamental FLIR systems and complex modifications, might not have seemed justified once American involvement in Southeast Asia ended. The technology didn't disappear, however. Many of the Quiet One's innovations appeared in later helicopters. The scissor-style four-bladed tail rotor that Hughes engineers developed became a standard feature on the AH-64 Apache attack helicopter. The techniques for modifying main rotor blade tips to reduce blade vortex interaction influenced subsequent helicopter designs. Research into helicopter noise reduction continued at universities and aerospace companies. The University of Maryland, for example, developed blade designs with curved tubes at the tips to divert air and counter vortex formation. These studies built directly on principles established by the Quiet One program. The concept of stealth helicopters lived on in classified programs. Aviation Week reported in 1995 that the Air Force maintained a stealth helicopter inside Area 51. The exact capabilities of such aircraft remain unknown. But on May 1, 2011, the world got a glimpse of how far the technology had advanced. During the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan, U.S. Navy SEALs arrived in modified Black Hawk helicopters. When one of these aircraft crashed during the operation, photographs revealed extensive stealth modifications. The helicopter featured a profiled fuselage to reduce radar signature, modified rotor hubs, and redesigned engine exhausts. The tail rotor incorporated advanced noise reduction features remarkably similar in concept to those pioneered by Hughes engineers 40 years earlier. The connection between the Quiet One and these modern stealth helicopters is direct. The 500P demonstrated that rotorcraft could be modified for low observable operations. It proved that helicopters could penetrate defended airspace using a combination of reduced noise, low-altitude flight, and radar-evading design. Every stealth helicopter that followed built on lessons learned from that single mission in December 1972. In April 1971, Hughes Tool Company had proclaimed the 500P the world's quietest helicopter. According to experts who have studied the aircraft's specifications, that title still stands. Despite decades of advancement in materials, engines, and rotor design, no helicopter has achieved the same degree of noise reduction while maintaining operational capability. The Quiet One exists now primarily in declassified documents and fading photographs. The aircraft itself is long gone, either destroyed or languishing in some classified storage facility. But its influence extends through modern military aviation. Every special operations helicopter, every aircraft designed for clandestine insertion and extraction, owes a debt to the engineers who solved the impossible problem of making a helicopter silent. The two pilots who flew the mission, Lamoth and Smith, returned to civilian life after their Air America service ended. The two Lao commandos who actually placed the wiretap remain anonymous, their names still classified. The intelligence analysts who processed the intercepted communications have never publicly discussed what they learned. The full story of what the Vinh wiretap revealed, what strategic advantages it provided, remains locked in CIA archives. What we know for certain is this: for one brief period, the impossible became possible. A helicopter flew deep into enemy territory undetected, completing its mission and returning safely. The technology required didn't exist until engineers created it specifically for this purpose, and in doing so, they changed the future of military aviation. The story of the CIA's silent helicopter answers the questions posed by its very existence. Why did the agency need such an aircraft? Because traditional intelligence gathering had failed, and only direct access to enemy communications could provide the insights American negotiators desperately required. What made it silent? A combination of innovations: 5-bladed rotors, modified blade tips, scissor-style tail rotors, advanced mufflers, and meticulous engineering of every noise-producing component. Why build it in 1970? Because the technology to create truly quiet helicopters emerged from civilian noise reduction efforts, and the strategic necessity of the Vietnam endgame demanded immediate action. The Hughes 500P represented a unique convergence of necessity and capability. The CIA needed to accomplish something that seemed impossible. Engineers and manufacturers had just developed technologies that might make it possible. With White House approval and blank check funding, the Quiet One transformed from concept to operational aircraft in less than 3 years. The single mission it flew changed more than just the Vietnam War intelligence picture. It proved that stealth technology could be applied to rotorcraft. It demonstrated that helicopters could conduct clandestine operations in heavily defended territory. It showed that with sufficient engineering expertise and determination, fundamental limitations could be overcome. Today, stealth helicopters continue flying classified missions for special operations forces. The exact capabilities of these modern aircraft remain secret, but their existence traces directly back to 2 Black Hughes 500Ps and 1 dangerous night over North Vietnam. The Quiet One's legacy isn't just the technology it pioneered, it's the proof that impossible missions require impossible technology, and that with enough skill and courage, both can be achieved. The men who made it happen, pilots, engineers, commandos, and analysts, operated in complete secrecy. Most never received public recognition for their roles. The helicopter they created existed for just one mission, then vanished from history. But somewhere in the darkness, over battlefields and behind enemy lines, their work continues. Every special operations helicopter, every clandestine insertion, every impossible mission made possible by stealth technology honors the legacy of the Quiet One.